I've broken their will.
Yeah. Is there mental health maybe?
All right, raise your hand if you're here. All right, only a couple of you here, rest are absent. And who are we missing here? Owen is gone. Who else are we missing? Levi's here.
There's
Where were you?
I got lost.
Yeah, I wish I didn't believe you, but. All righty then. Do you want to hear the good news or the gooder news? Yes, it didn't flip this time.
Do you want a gavel? We have a gavel.
No, I broke a gavel. The teacher used to be next door had a gavel, and I took it in here. Bang! 1 pound broke. They don't make gavels like they used to.
My grandpa had a paddle in his classroom. He was pretty.
That's why I do that. See, then the mice broke. Back, we're back. Okay, let's go ahead. I'll tell you the good news. But we're talking about in Miles City. We're talking about my principal of our elementary school, who's kind of an idiot. But he had 3 paddles. Yeah, 3 paddles. And I only had twice, and I was framed both times. But I got spanked with the paddle, and you had to pick the paddle. It's true. You had 3 paddles. You picked the paddle.
Did you get to sign it afterwards?
I should have, because that'd be worth a lot of money now. But 1 paddle was just a straight paddle. The next one had a paddle with 1 big hole. The next one with a paddle with a bunch of little holes, drills into it. You pick the paddle.
Which one was the worst?
Huh? Which one's worse? All the little holes, because that's air pressure, so you can really get a lot of steam. But I knew the trick. But yeah, a lot of people think you pick the one with a lot of holes because you got surface area. Both times I was framed.
Sure.
I miss the days when they could, under the library, there used to be an area where they would do students. For no reason, they just did it. No, they used to paddle students here many years ago. Don't you miss those days?
It happened in like the 80s.
Yeah. It was up until the late 80s, yeah. They would still paddle.
My grandpa would do that so much.
Let's talk more about beating people. Okay, so I'm coming up with a chance for, I'm going to decide tomorrow, a chance for extra credit the last week of school, but also I'm going to give you a chance for a movie to watch during spring break. I'll give you a list of potential movies and write a 1-page paper. Did I say spring break? I'm thinking way ahead. Christmas and/or Festivus break. And by the way, you notice I showed you the poll yesterday. Are you excited? Are you excited?
It's coming.
Limbo month is coming. It's amazing how fast I can clear a hall with that. But we just run. You guys can. All right, so. And the last day of school, I will limbo under a desk. That shows you how flexible I am. Just wait for it. Huh? I'm only 6'3". Yes.
So, I have a curiosity question. So when the administrator comes in the room, you yell a sass to get out of your desk. Have you ever had that happen?
Yes.
What's the reaction?
Just stare at a befuddled bemusement. Yeah, when the superintendent came, that was my favorite. They all yelled at sass, went to the desk. And that was also with people in the community, because I was up for the HEF thing. And that was actually really, really funny. I enjoyed that one immensely. Moving on. There will be an assignment over Christmas break, though. I warned you, don't glare at me. You can glare at me, but I got to do it. But what did I tell you? After the AP exam and after we do the final, what is it going to be?
Running.
Fitness, right? Time miles, bar hang, and wall sits. Well, I get a comfy chair and nap. Does that sound good? I've earned it, right? Just agree. So you get a comfy chair too. You and I.
I got your
She's the first one. You're a cooker. And you have presents. All right, so let's go ahead and take your notes out. Let's go and get started. We got right to the war. And then on that worksheet, we will do the second part of the cost next week. At the end of the week, I'll give you something on DBQs, which are both good and bad. They really are. But it's work, and work is work. So you got to grit your teeth and do it. But then again, we got to do an essay. It gives you documents that help you out. So that does help. You just got to get the documents in. Those of you who have done it know exactly what I'm talking about. Who has done a DBQ here? You know what I mean. They help you with the documents, but it is more work. It's just the way it is. But we got to do it. We got to do it. And it's not, I like reading documents anyways. So, we'll do that at the end of the week. So let's go ahead and get to finish the war. By the way, Polk was elected president. He sent John Slidell down to Mexico to try to buy what areas? And to make what is the border of Texas? Yeah. Yes, the Beaverhead. And with that would have been something. But, the Rio Grande didn't happen. They were thrown out. Oh, Polk made a treaty with what country about Oregon? And what is the parallel that would be extended to the sea? 49. It was 5440 is up here. 49. If you said 50 or close, yeah, it's the 49th parallel from here to here. Parallel because latitude lines are parallel. That's math. So, with that, then we got, who was sent down to the Rio Grande with soldiers, old rough and ready? Who was that? Yeah, Zachary Taylor. And what happened? What's the Thornton affair? Well, we don't know exactly what happened. Well, somebody did attack American fire-breathing dragons, right? Dragoons. Who attacked them? Who gave the spot resolution that said, show us the spot, north and south? His brief little bit into national politics. And this is one of those things where he got a little bit of a reputation, but then would be booted from office we won the war. Yay! Lincoln was against it, so he was opposed. Or what party was Lincoln? Wait. So the parties are getting bitterly divided over expansion, but the biggie was slave power. What was the battle where Taylor won a big victory, but the Mexicans stayed in the war? Say it again. Yeah, Monterrey. And so with that, here's Taylor. Taylor got reinforcements. One battle here at Palo Alto. Here's Monterrey. Here's the problem. Twofold. First off, Mexico did not quit. They were supposed to quit. They didn't quit. But Santa Anna's sitting there in the back. And he heard about Monterrey. And he sent word up to Washington, D.C. the fall of 1846, basically saying, you send me to Mexico City. The people want me back. They don't like this little group, a cabal or a junta of generals, a small group of generals in charge. I'll come in, I'll sell you California, New Mexico. He told the United States, help me get back into Mexico City. So the U.S. rolled the die, and going into the winter of 1846, the United States helped Santa Anna and all his wooden legs get to Veracruz. When he arrived at Veracruz, he was treated like a hero, a conquering hero. He was escorted up the mountain to Mexico City, basically came in as a conquering hero, and by acclaim, he's president again. And what's the first thing he announced he was going to do? Drive the American invaders out and retake Texas. So boy, did the United States screw up. They got rid of a shaky government and replaced it with a competent general. He was flawed, he made mistakes, but Santa Anna was much better than what they had. Mexico has a chance. So when that realized, what a terrible mistake, now the United States decided we either quit, or we roll the die and try to conquer Mexico City and force it to give it up. And that means going up 7,000 feet through mountain valleys, abandoning their supply line, which I'll explain more in a second. This is a big deal. But if the general can do this, they'll become a national hero. But if they give it to Taylor, Taylor's a Whig. Polk was a Democrat. He vowed one term, but he did not want to be replaced with a Whig. He wanted another Democrat. If Taylor gets this, old rough and ready, they'll follow the same formula as William Henry Harrison, old tip. And the Whigs can be reelected. So they took away Taylor's army. Literally took his army away, gave it to another general. They took it away. So Taylor's still up here. His experienced soldiers were replaced with raw recruits. who had never fought, for the most part. And his army was given to another general here. While that's going on, Santa Anna takes his best forces and was marching north. Perfect timing. If they could have defeated Taylor and his untrained recruits, we'd have an entirely different course of history. The battle will be the Battle of Buena Vista. So February 1847, in the high mountains around northern Mexico, beautiful dry plateau, a really confusing battle. This lithograph really exaggerates the mountains, but I guess you see pictures of it. It's quite spectacular there. I've not been there. I heard it's just amazing, that dry, high mountain plateau. But this battle raged back and forth for a few days. The Americans have advantage of better officers. Mexican officers were mostly, cronies, people who bought their positions. The men didn't trust them. The U.S. had a little bit of that, but the U.S. had West Point, and that made a big deal. Trained officers, the men trust them more. Doesn't mean the officers don't make mistakes and do all that, but they just trust them more than a bunch of relatives of Santa Anna. And this lithograph is one of the most famous. It shows Taylor and the Mexicans charged time after time in the American lines, and the American lines held, partially because of American artillery. These are brass, so bronze cannon right there. But the new weapon, you remember grape shot? Little balls like this, about 12 of them, they fire out like that. Well, they had a weapon that was coming from Europe. It's called canister. So imagine a can, like a cylinder can about that big, literally a cylinder can. But they would fill the can with between 200 and 300 musket balls, crudely made lead balls. They jam that in the cannon with the gunpowder charge first, fire that out, and can you imagine what that would be? It would come out like a massive shotgun. For 200 yards, they would just cover that with musket balls. What's going to happen to anybody in that ring, in that fire radius? It won't leave nice bodies either. It leaves just mounds of flesh. It's horrific. This horrific weapon. And the Mexicans charge time after time, and it just comes in pieces. This weapon is going to be one of the weapons that will lead to innumerable casualties in the Civil War. And eventually they'll have a name for this. A colonel in the British Army will give a name for that. Shells designed to kind of explode out. His name was shrapnel. So that's where the term shrapnel comes in that third person. A shell designed to explode into a million pieces and rip bodies apart, which is what we have now. But, good picture of this, exaggerated a little bit. At the end of the day, Santa Anna retreated. Taylor's even a bigger hero. Hoax strategy failed miserably. Taylor comes out of this, an unimaginable hero. By the way, his aide was a West Point graduate and his his son-in-law. So, from Mississippi. His son-in-law was a man by the name of Jefferson Davis. What would Davis become down the road? President of the Confederacy. The Mexican War really was a training ground for the Civil War. Jefferson Davis, West Point graduate, then become Secretary of War, senator. He was senator when the secession, and he would leave to become the first president, only president. So who will replace Holt or Scott? Winfield Scott, another hero of the War of 1812, maybe the greatest general in American history. A brilliant organizer, incredibly brave, but the men did not particularly like him. He was a stickler for discipline. Discipline out. Perfectly pressed uniforms, polished buttons. That's what they always talk about, polishing your brass buttons. He was a martinet, that's called. And in fact, they gave him the nickname Old Fuss and Feathers. Old Fuss and Feathers doesn't quite sound like Old Hickory or Old Rough and Ready. That's why they gave it to him, because Scott was a Whig, but they figured he'll never have the popular appeal. So, he is given some trained, some untrained, almost 10,000 troops, and they're going to land right here at Veracruz, push through the Mexican defenses, and then go uphill. through mountain passes. Any one of those mountain passes, they could have been stopped. And they had to abandon their supply line and go up the hill. The reason why is, first off, he didn't have enough men to hold the supply line. This is an all or nothing affair. If they would have been stopped at any one of 3 major passes, they would have been defeated and Mexico would have won the war. And they almost were 3 different times. Well, 2 different times, I'm sorry. 2 different times. Every observer thought there's no way Scott can win. But what mosquito-borne illness just ravaged Veracruz in the summer?
Malaria.
Malaria is a very good guess, but it's not malaria. There's another mosquito-borne disease. We know now it's mosquito-borne. Some of you probably heard. Good guess, yellow fever, which is just horrible. A horrible way to go, as opposed to the not horrible, I know. But 3 different battles. They broke through, and the last one was the Battle of Chapultepec, an old Spanish fort built on an Aztec temple. And when they took this fort, Santa Anna had to flee Mexico City, and it was open. At this battle, there's going to be a number of Civil War generals will fight there. All us young officers at that time, from Braxton Bragg, it was horrible, but would fight there. And I just thought of a story, I'll tell you later. But George McClellan, one of the most important Union generals, George Meade, a guy named Ulysses S. Grant would be there. One of the heroes of the battle, he would crawl around the Mexican lines on his hands and knees for nearly 6 hours to find a hole in their line to attack. He'd be personally commended by Scott, a slave owner by the name of Robert E. Lee. So there's a lot of Civil War generals going to fight here. Chapultepec, and one more thing, and you have to agree with me. That too would make a great name for a child, wouldn't it? It's been a long time, right? Since Ticonderoga. Wouldn't Chapultepec make a great name? Come here, little Chapultepec. And if you have twins, they'd be Chapultepec 1 and Chapultepec 2. And it's fun to say. Try it. Chapultepec. Oh, come on. With feeling. Chapultepec. Yeah, doesn't that feel good? Doesn't that feel good? There's elements still there, but Mexico City is such a massive city, it kind of sprawls around it now. And so, in September, Scott's forces enter Mexico City. It's a glorious victory. But Scott knows something that Polk does not know. Scott is there to take Mexico City and Fort Santa Anna, who's fleeing, force him to sign away California and New Mexico. But Scott knows taking Mexico City is a trap. He's surrounded by a hostile civilian population. He's out of supplies. He's stuck in this city. He can't stay long. He didn't conquer Mexico. He took Mexico City. And he knows something. And Santa Anna knew something too. And he's fleeing north. Everyone knew their history. In fact, they all studied one general, then emperor of France. And when he invaded what country in 1812? Russia, and got stuck. The Russians basically, once they were defeated near Moscow, they let him take Moscow, which was not the capital, but like the holy city of Russia. Couldn't stay. The Russians said, yeah, you got Moscow, big deal, now what? He ran out of supplies and had to leave, and his army would be destroyed in the retreat. And Scott knows this could be like Moscow. But Polk doesn't know that. Polk heard Mexico City is about ready to fall, and so he actually sent word, why should we just settle for California and New Mexico? Let's do what? Take the whole thing. All the way down to the Yucatan. Take it all. Polk said, get all of this. By the way, not only did Scott know that's insane, they can't do that, but think of the issue that would set about slave states and free states. They had enough of an issue with this. So Polk ordered this. Now, Scott is going to ignore him. But Santa Anna is going to be caught. Santa Anna is fleeing north. And you can see as he got to this big valley, he was trapped by the fact that this is nowhere near Mexico City. And he had over 100 wagons of his own personal gear So they had this long wagon train that just stuck for Santa Anna. So American dragoons caught him north of Mexico City. If Santa Anna would have just got away, Scott, I don't know what Scott would have done. He would eventually have to leave, and who knows what would have happened. But Santa Anna's caught. Now the thing is, he had wagon trains of wine and money and rugs and all this stuff, and of course wagon after wagon of fake legs. All these wooden legs and other legs. And the dragoons got up, they caught Santa Anna, and as you can imagine, all the wine and everything was liberated by the dragoons. I think you know what I mean. And they went through just stealing and looting and taking things. Now I don't know what would happen when they opened up wagons literally full of mostly wooden legs. Like, whoa! Legs for like when he's acting like an admiral or on a horseback. Special occasions. They had all these wooden legs carved to look like an actual leg or foot. Some were just a stump. And a lot of them, different kinds of wood. He had legs that were encrusted with diamonds and rubies. He had one leg that was solid silver and another leg which was solid gold, which how could you possibly move with a solid gold leg? Those disappeared real fast. They also had legs that were, oh, my personal favorite. He had a leg that was a sword. And I'm still trying to figure out what that is. It had like a sheath, so you take it off and it's a sword. I guess you go, on guard. And the thing about that first step into the dirt, the sword, when the sword go right down. The other one was he had one that was a cannon.
Oh my goodness. No.
Bang! Think about the poor stump. Okay, so those disappeared. I wish they still had the cannon one. That was just, but they would like were running around with wooden legs. They played baseball with them. Yes, baseball was there. Slightly different rules, but baseball had been invented. Yeah. Right here. Right here. So just above the knee, and it just ripped off. So there's a piece of bones. It was nasty, as opposed to the unnasty ripping off your leg. But somebody was able to take those legs and somehow get them back to the United States. And they carved something out of the wood that soon became like the souvenir of the war. You had to have this. Toothpicks. Santa Ana toothpicks became like the souvenir. And there's another one, how do you know they're from the wooden legs? So pretty soon just toothpicks became Santa Ana toothpicks. And they were more like a pencil back then. So you would use to pick your teeth and then you would carve another point. So they're a little bit thinner than that toothpick, or that pencil. And there's one at the Smithsonian Museum of American History, this kind of gnarled wooden thing, Santa Ana toothpick. And I always wonder what Santa Anna thought, because he eventually would be kicked out of office again and would go live in New York City during the Civil War. During the U.S. Civil War, he was in New York City. And there were still Santa Ana toothpicks all over. By the way, what did he bring from Mexico that would soon be popularized and sold all over the United States? Chewing gum. Chewing gum, yeah. He brought chewing gum. So Santa Ana's kind of an important character. Well, he delayed. Finally, Scott and him basically actually, it was Nicholas Trist and him sat down. Trist was the man who Polk originally said, and he ignored Polk. So let's get the whole thing. Remember I told you about the glass? See the crack? In the glass negative? By the way, doesn't it look like they stuck this head on? To me, for some reason, I was looking at it like, maybe it's just his eyes. You had to hold still for 10 seconds so you'd be like this. That's why everyone looks like that. And that's the treaty. And what the treaty did is this. The Rio Grande would be the southern border. Also, the United States got the Mexican cession, which is California and New Mexico. And so all this area here. So Mexico ceded the claim, thus the term cession. So it's the Mexican cession. Now, the U.S. wanted to act like this was not a war of conquest. We just fought for our border, then just happened to buy California. And so the U.S. paid $15 million. And then also, U.S. claims to the Mexican government, remember the debt? $3.3 million. So that's the U.S. $18.3 million, which was pretty significant. I know, for us today, $18.3 million is pocket change. But back then, that was real money. And So we can act like it wasn't a war of conquest. We bought it fair and square. Well, we bought it because we conquered them. We didn't quite conquer them, but we took it in a war. And the thought was, okay, now we have all this land, all this here, got Oregon. Look at that map over there. The United States has grown by a third with Polk as president. It's kind of remarkable. Isn't this just remarkable? And by the way, this is about what the United States paid for Louisiana. Here. Which is a better deal? Louisiana or this for the United States? This is outright fact. How rich is California? Yes.
So was the rest of what we call now Texas part of the New Mexico part then?
Yeah, well, not quite yet. So this was still claimed as Texas. But it's going to be the Compromise of 1850 that will give the Texas border we have now. We have as a country. Not just you and I. Now, with that, wow, all this land. I'm sure there'll be no fight over what's going to go into this land. Is there nothing to see here? Move on. Well, even before the treaty was signed, we have what's called the Wilmot Proviso. Now, proviso just means an amendment. So just write down the Wilmot Proviso. David Wilmot was a congressman, a backbencher, so kind of an unknown congressman from Pennsylvania. Within a year, his name would be the most famous in history. And I want to add I want to say Wilmot, but I don't. I'm saying Wilmot. I'm very conscious. I want to add another L there for some reason. So, just write Wilmot Proviso. I wrote the part for the law. I helped you out with handy underlining. What did it say? And this was done before the treaty. So this is just assuming any land in the U.S. Well, what does it say? You don't have to write it down, obviously. Just write down Wilmot Proviso. You like my font? Don't you love that font? What does it say? What is that saying? Yes.
Slavery or that slavery exists in any territory.
So what territory, what do we call that territory the United States got? The Mexican cession, no slavery in those territories. What is the term for no slavery in the territories?
Free soil.
Free soil. So free soil in the Mexican cession. That's what it says, free soil. No expansion to slavery in the Mexican cession. Now this was added to an appropriations or spending bill. I should add, somebody yesterday said, they looked at it fast and they said, why did we talk about monkeys' heroin? And I thought that was awesome and I appreciated that immensely. And I said, we should not give monkeys heroin. So, herein. How do you suppose the South reacted to this? Great idea, let's do it. Yeah.
What's the main territories versus?
States have sovereign powers, where territories are still administered by the federal government. So remember federalism, we have the federal government and then state government. Territories are still administered by the federal government. States have certain powers, even though the federal government is supreme. Territories, all federal government. There's no any government, any constitution they have is decided by the federal government, meaning Congress. So here's the thing. By the way, this is a map of 1848. Isn't that a good map? It's in session. There's Texas. They were map makers. My generation, we can make maps. So it passed the House. It passed the House. This took Southerners completely by surprise. They never dreamed that it would pass the House. Even though the majority of members of the House were from the North. They just never dreamed. Failed in the Senate. The Constitution was written for the Senate to stifle radical action. It was, and it did that, as it does now, basically stifles all action today. But back then, that was the goal. They would only vote on this 42 times. 42 times. It passed the House, passed the Senate. Abraham Lincoln will later say, we voted on this 47 times. So it appears as though they did debate it more times, but it actually passed the House 42 times in a year. They passed it, Senate failed. Over and over. Pretty soon that's all everyone can talk about. Wilmot, 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 Wilmot. Literally. You want to get into a fist fight? Say Wilmot. And Southerners were soon bringing guns and knives into the floor of the House, threatening Northerners who talked Wilmot, trying to bully them. And this has become, like overnight, Civil War, after the great victory of the Mexican War. So we have a little presidential election just in time for talk of Civil War. The Whigs, oh, up and ready. The war hero. One more time with the war hero. Henry Clay would have to step back again. But Taylor was a Southerner. He had a plantation in Louisiana. Millard Fillmore was a Northerner. He's the vice president. And so they tried to do the North and the South, just like Harrison was from the North, John Taylor was from the South in 1840. So they thought they could make this work. Taylor and Fillmore. And this is pretty common. The vice president would try to shore up some weakness of the presidential candidate. You see this all the way through today. And Taylor, and then we're going to push the war hero and the image of the war hero on Old Rough and Ready again. So what do you suppose Taylor's campaign's response would be? What is Zachary Taylor's position on Wilmot? What's his position? The Battle of Monterey. Remember, I won the Battle of Monterey? What's your position of slavery in the territories? The Battle of Buena Vista. What's your position on the tariff? Old Rough and Ready. You catch it? Nothing. Just use the Z's as war hero, war hero, war hero, and avoid the issues. But behind the scenes, Northern Whigs were told, Taylor's a Southerner, he can't say it, but he's in the Whig Party, and that's Henry Clay's party. You can trust him. Southern Whigs were told, he's a plantation owner. He has slaves. He can't say it, but he's on our side about expansion of slavery. What was Taylor's actual position? He had no idea. He really didn't know. Taylor had not paid attention. He just knew he didn't like certain things about war of conquest. Other than that, was about it. The Democrats were in disarray. So they would nominate a man from Michigan who thought he was going to get the nomination way back in 1844. Another hero, kind of exaggerated from the War of 1812, Lewis Cass. And his grand idea to avoid the concept of Wilmot, which was done by a Democrat. This shows how divided the Democrats were over slavery. It was, let the voters decide. It's called popular sovereignty. So we'll let the territories themselves decide. California territory and whatever they make out of the massive New Mexico territory. We'll let these territories decide their constitution and not the federal government. And that sounds very democratic. We'll let the people, the voters, decide. Obviously not the people who are slaves or women or many other people, but it sounds very democratic. And that's what gave them the nomination. Before we get to that, remember we have a lot of South or amphibian-based presidential candidates? That's Cass. Doesn't he look like a toad? Yeah. Can't you see that tongue come on, like just grab a fly? And the next part is, and this is even more important, they drew that. They thought that was a good look. The toad. I can't even make that face. I mean, I can't do it. It actually hurts to make that face. By the way, that must have been his resting face. So it appeared democratic, but it's not. It's a total scam. Popular sovereignty would be a disaster. And the big reason why is vote. When do you have the vote? Vote when? Right away or down the road? Will you have slave codes or not have slave codes? And this shows why it's a scam. And this is part of the reason why the Civil War would happen. It's one of those, if you don't think about it, sounds democratic. So in 1848, did Mexico have slavery? That was the reason for Texas independence. There's no slave codes. There's no slaveholders. If they would have picked right away, they would have came in without slave codes. But if they would have waited, let's say 5 years, that means they have to, for 5 years, open up to slavery. And who would that encourage to come in? Slaveholders with their slaves. So all that is when you have the vote. When they have an area that was going to be ripe for migration, Kansas, in 1854, you're going to get both groups come in and literal civil war 7 years before the Civil War began. It's a total scam. Actually, this is what the slaveholders wanted. What? Line. Came from the Missouri Compromise for the Louisiana Purchase. Remember the line? 3630. 3630 stopped right there. It doesn't affect this. You see the advantage now for the South? A lot of people thought they'd just extend the line. But now, they don't need slaves on both sides. The South wanted this. So, Cass got in, a lot of Democrats were furious. And they would form another party. Oh. I already told you that one, when you vote. I forgot about that. So, the Free Soil Party. So remember the old Liberty Party? Those are abolitionists. This now is maybe not abolition, but it's no slavery in the territories. And remember how the Democrats thought Martin Van Buren might be a Trojan horse against slavery? He was. He would become the standard bearer for the no slavery in the territories, basically the Wilmot Party. And I remember when I was in school, I know what you're saying, it was about this time, but I'm actually not quite that old. But when I was in school, I remember being told by my teacher, and I was told this in college too by one professor, that the Free Soilers were all Whigs. They're Whigs. That's actually not true at all. The Democratic Party of the North, the majority were probably Free Soilers. And so the Free Soil Party were almost all Democrats. And it would be ironically, at least the early roots of the Republican Party that's coming will be at first Democrats, angry over free soil. Don't get mad at me. I have nothing to do with it. Van Buren was a Democrat. This split the Democratic vote because the Free Soil Party was never going to have enough to win the presidency, but they're going to take away Democratic votes from Cass. And maybe also the anti-amphibian vote was growing dramatically at this time. There was a lot of anti-amphibian antipathy. I want to be full of the consideration. Oh, by the way, you got to admit, John Quincy Adams' son Charles here looks terrifying. It runs in the family, doesn't it? And that's not a 4 head, is it? That's a 5, 6, maybe 7 head. You with me on that? Okay, so when the election came out, Taylor won a resounding victory. Pretty big victory. And the Free Soilers didn't get any electoral votes, but got 10% of the vote, and that's all in the North. So that shows you how divided Northern Democrats were. By the way, when the Republican Party was formed, that means the Democratic Party pretty much became a Southern pro-slavery party. That's coming down the road. Even though it's still a lot of Democrats in the North. National victory. Taylor had no idea. No idea. What's he going to do? We should have one more thing really quick. 1853, this is actually under a different president now, it's President Pierce, but I want to give you the Gadsden Purchase. Gadsden was Secretary of State. The last little bit of the continental United States was purchased the claim from Mexico. This little bit right here for $10 million. The reason why is this was flat, and the thought was for a southern route of the Transcontinental Railroad. Actually, that's where the Southern Pacific Railroad would go, right along here. And you notice the United States paid $10 million for that stretch of desert, essentially. Not quite desert, but a lot of it's desert. Guilt over what happened with the Mexican cession. But the thought was, let's go back to Taylor. Taylor was president, he really had no idea what he wanted on Wilmot. But the thought was, we have lots of time. Yeah. We'll get to it again, but it's Franklin Pierce. Franklin Pierce. A Dolphins, which we'll get to. So, the thought was, it'll be a long time before enough people move in to really worry about territorial government, enough citizens move in. Territorial government, or for that matter, about statehood, long time. So Taylor has time, maybe to find a new president, who knows? Something will happen. In less than a few months after Taylor was inaugurated, California wanted to become a state and had more than enough people. Why? What happened that would change everything? Yes. The gold rush. I love this picture of sleepy little San Francisco in 1848. But in 1848, gold was discovered at Sutter's Mill, just west of Sacramento. Which then Sacramento was literally nothing but a small mission and a few hovels. I mean, there was nothing there. And this was the mill, which is a granary mill on used water power to mill grain. They found gold. And this appeared to be the mother lode. And by the time word got back the winter of 48, that's going to trigger a massive gold rush. And people are going to come to California all through that spring. The fastest way was to take a fast clipper ship, these fast, thin clippers all the way around South America. An even faster way with supplies, though, was to go to Nicaragua. You go down to Nicaragua, cross over, and I love that you cross over because they have 200 jackasses waiting to take your stuff, cross over, and go up to California. A guy named Cornelius Vanderbilt, who we'll get to later, started this trade, and he would get rich. Called himself the Commodore after this trade, and use that to buy railroads. And we're coming to the rail baron. And yes, he'd have a college. He felt guilty about his business practices and wanted to be remembered for a college. Stanford. Right? So that's another rail baron who wanted Stanford. But, and what did they call those people that came that winter and spring? That's where you get the term 49ers. And all of a sudden, California has more than enough people, and they demand to have statehood, and one more thing, free or slave. Free. There's no slave codes in California. No one's going to bring slaves to an area that doesn't have slave codes. And it'd be so expensive anyways. And help for the slaves, but they didn't care about that, obviously. They would come in as a free slave. Are you ready for the atomic bomb to explode in Washington, D.C.? They have to decide now. And we're coming up to an even bigger threat than the Missouri Compromise or the Nullification Compromise. 1850 will blow up. And on that happy note, we should talk a little bit about slavery in America. Because what's going on? We've talked a lot about it on the periphery, except when we talked about colonial Virginia. We got to come back. This is from Am I Not a Man and a Brother? This is from a British anti-slavery journal. But there's a lot of contradictions within abolitionism, but this is part of the growing British anti-slavery movement. So let's talk a little bit about, just a quick review, things we already know. The date we know for sure that the first African slaves arrived in British colonies was 1619 in Jamestown. It very well could have been 1617, but we're not 100% sure. We know 1619. But remember, we said indentured servitude. In fact, slavery was much more like indentured servitude, and there were American Indians who were slaves, whites who were slaves, except they had that contract. But then Bacon's Rebellion would be that key moment where it would show the absolute need for strong slave codes. What's the most important of the slave codes? Remember those fornication laws that meant slavery is permanent. There were, the ideas about race and color of skin or racism did not exist until slavery in the New World, and that's where racism comes from. And we'll talk more about that, but don't forget this concept that comes from Bacon's Rebellion. The vast majority of people there were workers, were slaves, or indentured servants, or former indentured servants, former slaves. And the slave codes drove a wedge. And the indentured servants didn't have much, but they had one thing. The piece of paper that said they're a citizen and therefore free. And why did they have that piece of paper? At first it was because I'm from England, but pretty soon it became because of politics. There must be something superior. I'm poor, I have no power, but at least I have that. And the thing is, it's from economic roots. And that's so easily forgotten. Because we see color of skin and just assume it's like a social thing. No, it's money. Those on top wanted everyone on the bottom to fight. And they're fighting, they stay on top. That would never happen today. That's me saying always look at economic roots to a lot of things. If everybody else is fighting, the people on top stay on top. Which could be a good thing or bad thing, but it's important to know that. So, with that, remember the triangular trade? What was this route called? From Africa to the New World? Do you remember that term? Middle Passage. The Middle Passage. We don't know exactly how many Africans were brought over to the New World. This is one estimation that has it about 11,328,000. I've seen it as high as 13 million. I think we're starting to, it's unimaginable how many humans were brought over. And about a third to a half died in transit. About 500,000 were brought to what is now the United States, or the United States. Most were brought to the Caribbean or Brazil. And so that's why if you go to Cuba, for example, over 70% of the population is of African descent. Jamaica is at 98%, because they're all brought there as slaves. And that's why a little country here, like I'm thinking Belize, which was a British colony, African descent, slaves. They were to get the mahogany wood. So you see this all over. You depend on some cash crop to gouge out the wealth and then leave. And most of the people brought over, I think I've said this before, I was always told it was slave hunting expeditions done by Africans. Europeans almost never did this. Various kingdoms or groups would be fighting and they would capture prisoners from one kingdom and sell them as slaves. As it appears, more and more we're learning that a significant number, if not the majority of people who were enslaved and brought to America voluntarily did it to pay off a debt. And they thought they would be like an indentured servant to pay off a debt. And then what happened to them? They were kidnapped and sent to the New World. Which to me makes it even more horrific. I mean, if someone being in prison at gunpoint is like, okay, you're in prison at gunpoint. I can kind of understand that. It makes it even more tragic and terrifying if you voluntarily do it thinking you're paying off your debt. And I'll be free like an indentured servant after a few years or a year. And next thing you know, you're being carted to the slave ports on the shore by other Africans. It's various Africans doing African, just people doing people. By the way, here's another horrific one. There was that holding the men by the neck, and clearly he ran away, so they're making an example of him. You see what's going to happen? Can you see it? Let me show you this happy note before you leave. See the axe? Split. He's being made an example. The whole system of slavery was taken. And on that happy note, Have a great day.
Thank you.
See you tomorrow.
Yeah.